Your book. Your book.
Yeah.
The Brave New Masculine, liberating men to heal, restore, be strengthened in their relationships with women. Um, Talk about that book. Talk about the reasoning behind it, the foundation, the
Mhm.
what is the force behind this book? What is driving you to what problem would this book be solving in your estimation?
Yeah. Yeah. So, in my experience, a lot of men are suffering in their relationships with women, right? Not because they don't want relationships with women, which is a little bit different from the perspective nowadays, which is like a lot of women are saying, like, "Oh, well, I don't even need a man," or "I don't want a man," which I think is total crap.
Right.
Um, I don't hear men saying that. They're not saying that they don't need women or that they don't want women. I actually think most men have very genuine intentions in their relationships with women and girls, and they just want to be able to please the women in their life and serve them to the best of their capacity. But they're getting met with a lot of resistance, right? And even when they're not getting met with a lot of resistance, they are at times not understanding some of the dynamics,
Hmm.
whether that be because of the differences in the way that the genders communicate or the differences in needs, the differences in wants and desires. And so the purpose of the book is really twofold. One, it's to help men perform at a higher level in their relationships with women, but it's the way that they do that is going to be by improving their relationship with themselves.
Wow.
Why does it have to be that way? Because part of what I teach and part of what I truly believe is that the people that we attract in our lives for a relationship at any given point in time in our lives is going to have everything to do with your self-worth and your self-image and your personal level of connection with you, right? Remember I talked about that earlier, that the biggest
Hmm.
problem that people are facing is that low self-worth, low self-image, poor self-image because of the internal disconnect with their own identity.
Hmm.
So if that exists, if you don't really know who you are, which means you're not grounded in a value system, you don't have strong beliefs and convictions that lead the way for your life and your choices and decisions, you're going to attract people who are just like that into your life experience.
Hmm.
And I'll tell you why. Because those people will feel familiar and you'll be comfortable with them. The moment that you, as a person who is lacking in those areas, who is suffering with that internal disconnect, if you were to meet a person that is very grounded in their convictions and beliefs, that has a core value system that guides all of their decisions, that knows who they are, that is very grounded in that identity, that person is either going to be super intimidating. They're going to you, your interpretation is going to be like, oh, that person's a arrogant or a jerk or an whatever, right? like
Right.
like a you're going to cast a negative judgment on them.
Hmm.
um or if it's in a dating capacity, it's going to be like, oh, like you won't even, like, that person's like, they're a lot, it's too much for me you
Right.
know so you wouldn't even know what to do with them, even if you met them, in a
That's
dating
facts.
capacity, you know.
Facts.
So that's why you have to, like, actually come home first, right? And then when I say you, I don't mean you, Raymond. I mean whoever
Hmm.
is listening, right? Me. I had to do this.
Facts.
We have to come home to ourselves first. We have to reestablish this connection, the spiritual connection. We have to get grounded in our own identity, which includes a value system and healthy beliefs
Hmm.
and convictions around who we are. And then we can start to have healthier thoughts and take better and more consistent, meaningful actions to create the outcomes in our lives. Otherwise, the cycle is always the same. It's what you put in the cycle that's either going to make or break your outcomes, you know? And so that's really the premise of the book, which is also the premise of how I work with people. I'm going to help people get to that place where they don't have that broken identity. I'll tell you, one of the hardest questions for people to answer, Raymond, is
Hmm.
who are you?
Wow.
3 words, so simple. Who are you?
Hmm.
It's going to stump the vast majority of people that you ask. And
Facts.
you could test it out. Test it out with your friends, your family, at a social gathering with people you don't know. Just
Hmm.
be like, "Who are you?" This is where people will gravitate towards. They'll tell you their job, their race or ethnicity. They'll tell you their gender. They'll talk to you about things that they do or roles and responsibilities that they have. Like, I'm a dad, I'm a mom, I'm an
Hmm.
employee. Like, they'll tell you about what they do as part of what they are. And
Hmm.
that doesn't work. It
Wow.
doesn't work. If we are over identified with the things we do and we're taking that on as an identity,
Hmm.
we're it's our identity is always going to feel um, shallow, and it's always going to be wavering, right? Like, anything can come along and change my identity. Namely, if I change my job, if
Hmm.
I change my relationship status, if I change really anything about the surface level of what I do, all of a sudden that's an identity crisis,
Right.
right? And that's why a lot of people stay in these really bad situations, toxic work environment, toxic marriage or romantic relationship, things like that,
Hmm.
because if I leave this situation, then who am I? Now,
Facts.
if
Big
you're
facts.
living like that, you're missing out on so much.
100% true. I mean, especially being fresh out the military, like maybe a week and a half, 2 weeks out the Air Force. There's a part of me, especially I built my main channel off of Air Force content, and so I
Mhm,
had 1,000 plus videos on there of just helping people join the Air Force efficiently, helping solve problems in the chain of command, how to promote all these type of things. And so when I made my last live stream on I'm officially out the Air Force, something kind of died with me, and a lot of the comments were kind of reflected that, as
mhm,
far as I felt like I'm losing something, I'm losing a friend or something, or losing, I don't know, but there's definitely some truth as far as identifying with what you do, because typically, at least from a man's perspective, we tend to be judged based off what we are instead of who we are. And so
right.
some of the main questions that come up is like, what do you do, where do you work, how much do you make, how tall are you, how
Mhm,
strong are you, how fast are you,
right.
how are you at solving problems, versus no one really cares about what you think, or who you are behind the closed door, your hobbies. Those things usually come later after you solve a problem for somebody. So that's definitely intriguing,
Mhm.
thought process to, I would definitely pose the question to you: who are you, Oriana?
Yeah, yeah. Thank you for asking me, and thank you for caring about my response.
Most
I
definitely.
am a child of God.
Wow.
That's my answer about my identity. I am a child of God. And I'll tell you, it was in the course of my own self work and in my journey that I actually heard that whispered into my ear,
Hmm.
this ear specifically, right? I was like in the middle of like one of the most painful experiences of my life, which was I was going through a divorce.
Hmm.
It was an ugly one. And I took a solo trip because I needed to be able to just like be with myself so that I can get clarity about what decisions I needed to make. These
Hmm.
decisions were really critical life decisions and they were very high stakes, and the situation I was in was very cloudy, you know?
Wow.
And so I took a solo trip. The entire purpose of that trip was not for me to just sit around. I actually went to a retreat by myself to do my self work. And it was in that retreat, called Finding True Self was the name of the retreat, that came to me on the last day. You know, we
Wow.
were doing, I specifically, we were doing deep, deep identity work, right? I
Hmm.
had lost myself in a relationship, and the thing that I needed the most was to find myself again. And when I heard I am a child of God in my ear, you know, that has never left me. You know, that was when I
Wow.
realized who I really am. And from there, everything has unfolded in terms of, what I did next, the next stages and phases of my life, realizing that I had built what from the outside looking in looked like a very good or successful life, but it was also a false life.
Hmm.
It was a life that I built from a false identity. And so that life was no longer aligned with me anymore. I lost myself in that life and in that relationship. I was at a point where I didn't even recognize myself anymore.
Hmm.
I was working a job that was very stressful and was actually physically and psychologically harming me.
Wow.
But I had put myself in all of those situations, right? Like, I created all of that.
Hmm.
from the false self-identity, right? So you can create a very, like, lucrative or successful life from the outside looking in, from this false identity, and still be experiencing an incredible amount of pain inside. This is the reason that a lot of people actually experience what they call a midlife crisis.
Mhm.
I really believe the midlife crisis is truly like a spiritual awakening, in that people start questioning at that point in time everything, like, who am I? What am I doing here? What is this life about? Like, is this really it? Is this all there
Mhm.
is? Like, that's a big question to have to face yourself with. And if you're asking, like, is this all there is, like, with that kind of like angst, obviously you're not satisfied with where you're at, right?
Wow.
That just happened to me at a really young age because, in 2013 I had a medical malpractice, and I got very, very sick, and I almost died.
Wow.
And so having to be like, to come face to face with like the potential end of my life, that's what triggered my spiritual awakening, or my midlife crisis, so to speak. And so I was asking myself those questions in my early 30s,
Wow.
and I'll tell people, like, you don't need a, like, a tragic event in your life to happen for you to wake up
Mhm.
to, the reality of what your life is, and the fact that you need to take greater ownership and responsibility. Like, you don't need a health crisis, you know you don't need to wait until
Yeah.
you get laid off or lose your job, or
Yeah.
or have your reputation blow up in your face. You don't need to wait for your marriage to crumble.
Yeah.
Like, start asking these questions. Like, if you can literally sit down and ask yourself, like, is this all there is, and be happy with the answer, okay, fine.
Facts.
But if you sit down and you really genuinely ask yourself, is this all there is, and you're not happy with that answer, something's got to give. And you
Big
can
facts.
choose, like, you can consciously choose to take action on this now, or you can wait until something blows up. And I would suggest not waiting, because the when it comes time, I truly believe, like, again, this is a spiritual perspective, but when it comes time for you to create change in your life, you start getting like little taps on the shoulder,
Yeah.
like, hey, you should look at this. Hey, you should pay attention to that. And if you don't pay attention to those little taps on the shoulder, they're going to start getting, like, the signs and signals are going to start getting bigger and more overt. It's now no longer going to be a tap on the shoulder. One day it's going to be a shove. You're
Facts.
going to get shoved up against a wall, or you're going to, God forbid, but you're going to have some kind of crisis in your life, like I
Yeah.
did. And when I looked back, Raymond, like, there were taps on my shoulder for years,
Mhm.
years, telling me, "Hey, wake up to this. Hey, look at that. Hey, don't ignore this anymore." And I never listened. And so when I was at that place where I was like, "Wow, God, why did you have to walk me to, like, literally, like, the edge of a cliff for me to
Mhm.
wake up? Why couldn't it be more gentle? Why couldn't this? Why me?" Right? Like, that self-victimization.
Mhm.
When I was there, that the revelation that I had was like, "I've been trying to tell you, girl.
Right.
Like, I've been trying to tell you for 20 years that this was not your life path, you know? And you
Mhm.
couldn't hear me. You couldn't hear me. So I needed to do something that would make you start listening, you
Wow.
know? And so I went from, and this is a span of years, we're talking
Mhm.
2013, so this is almost 10 years ago now. I had to go from being a victim to coming out of that and recognizing, like, oh, I'm here. Like, that happened to me because I
Mhm.
created the circumstances that led me there.
Wow.
And then once I got there, I could take responsibility and ownership over it. And I could actually allow myself to create something different, and then experience gratitude for the circumstances that led me to the new place,
True.
where I could create something new and different that was actually in alignment with who I am and what I came here to do.